Episode 1, The Grave That Breathed. When Father Elias returned to St. Daria after 20 years, he swore he'd forgotten how silence could weigh like guilt. The town was smaller than he remembered, the same cobbled paths, the same crooked bell tower, the same fog that clung to everything like unspoken prayer. But there was something new in the air. Something that hummed. The graveyard lay just behind the church, under a row of dying pines. And there it was, his mother's grave. The stone was pale, cracked with age, but it pulsed faintly in the light of dawn. The earth beneath it shifted, as if something underneath was breathing. Elias froze. The morning wind carried a faint sound, like someone whispering his name through the soil. He knelt, pressing his hand to the dirt. It was warm. Too warm. He told himself it was imagination. That grief was playing tricks again. But when he stood, he saw the mark. A faint imprint of fingers pressing up from below. That night, he couldn't sleep. The town felt wrong, too quiet, too still. At midnight, the church bells rang once on their own, even though the ropes hung motionless. Elias lit a candle and walked back to the graveyard. The flame flickered violently, though there was no wind. He placed the candle before the grave. The wax dripped onto the name engraved in stone. Marta Varela. 1931 to 2005. The wax bled red. He whispered a prayer, the same one he'd used the day he buried her. Eternal rest grant unto her, O Lord. And then, the soil moved again. Slowly. Rhythmically. Like lungs drawing air. The candlelight dimmed, pulled toward the ground as though the earth itself were inhaling. Elias stumbled backward, his rosary shaking in his hands. A small crack opened in the dirt, no more than an inch, and from it escaped a soft sound. A sigh. Familiar. Human. He fell to his knees, trembling. Mother? The whisper that answered was not her voice, not anymore. It rasped through the still air, low and broken, yet unmistakably alive. It wasn't me who sinned. The grave sealed itself. The soil settled, silent again. When the first rays of dawn touched the cross above her tomb, Father Elias saw it, the faintest trace of steam rising from the dirt, like breath in the cold. He realized then that St. Daria had not forgotten him. It had been waiting. Episode 2, The Whisper Beneath the Soil. Dawn came slowly that morning, dragging light across the cracked windows of St. Daria like an unwanted guest. Father Elias hadn't slept. The candle he left at the grave had burned itself out during the night, leaving behind a pool of dark, sticky wax that looked too much like dried blood. He replayed the voice in his head over and over, "It wasn't me who sinned." It echoed between his thoughts like a prayer gone wrong. By noon, the townspeople had begun to whisper too. They said the bells had tolled on their own. That someone saw a pale hand reaching out from Marta Varela's grave. Elias dismissed them with weary smiles and trembling fingers. But when he stepped into the church, he felt it, that faint vibration again. Not in the air this time, but under his feet. Like a heartbeat pulsing through the stones. He descended into the crypt, carrying an old tape recorder he'd used for sermons. Dust floated like ghosts and the shafts of light piercing the darkness. He placed the recorder near the base of the grave, pressed record, and began to pray aloud. Our Father, who art in heaven. The air turned colder. The candles flickered, their flames bending toward the grave as if drawn by an unseen breath. He paused. Then came the whisper. Faint. Fragmented. Rising from the soil itself. Not me, not me. Elias stumbled back, staring at the recorder as the sound continued, words breaking through static, soft and desperate. It wasn't the voice of a demon. It was the voice of someone pleading. He let the tape run until the grave fell silent again. Then he shut it off, heart pounding. When he played it back upstairs, the prayer was gone, replaced entirely by that same whisper, clear and steady this time. "It wasn't me who sinned, it was him." Elias froze. He remembered the confession he'd made years ago, the sin he had buried with his mother. The night she had begged him to stop the ritual, and he hadn't. The sound on the tape grew louder, distorting, warping. The voice cracked into something inhuman, as if the ground itself were speaking through teeth of stone. "Find him, Elias, before the dawn stands again." The tape snapped with a violent pop. Smoke rose from the recorder, and the crucifix above the altar fell from the wall, clattering onto the floor. Elias didn't move. He could feel something watching him from beneath the floorboards, from below the earth. The hum he'd first heard on his return was now unmistakable. A low, pulsing rhythm. It wasn't just a grave. It was a heartbeat. Episode 3, The Nun Who Never Slept. The morning after the whisper, Father Elias climbed the narrow stairway to the convent attached to St. Daria. The hall smelled of incense and damp stone, the kind of scent that clung to faith and secrets. He sought one person, Sister Amara, the last nun still living in the cloister. He found her in the prayer room, eyes open but unfocused, rosary beads sliding through her fingers in endless rhythm. Her lips moved without sound, murmuring prayers too faint to hear. She didn't look at him until he spoke. "Mother Amara, I need to know what was done to my mother's grave." Her fingers froze mid-bead. Slowly, her gaze lifted, pupils milky, sleepless. "It was sealed," she whispered, "so it would not return." Elias frowned. "What do you mean by return?" The nun smiled faintly, as if remembering something she had tried to forget. The ritual was not for the dead. It was for what the dead carried back with them. Her words sent a chill through him. He leaned closer. "You were there, weren't you?" Amara nodded once. "I was the one who held the candle while your mother screamed." The rosary dropped from her hands. It didn't clatter, it burned, each bead turning black as it hit the floor. "She begged for mercy," Amara continued. "But it wasn't mercy the priest gave her. It was containment." Elias stepped back, breath quickening. "Containment of what?" Amara's eyes flicked toward the chapel door. "You must leave this town, Father, before dawn comes again. The grave is waking. I hear it every night. The humming." Her voice trailed off. Elias strained his ears. At first, there was only silence, then he caught it. A low vibration beneath the floorboards. Like the slow murmur of a choir deep underground. Amara's head snapped toward the sound, and her expression changed. Fear melted into something close to devotion. "It's calling again," she whispered. "It wants to be forgiven." She stood, trembling, and began to walk toward the chapel door. "Where are you going?" Elias called. "To pray, for the ones who won't wake." He followed her out into the dark nave of the church. The candles were all extinguished except one, flickering before the altar. Amara knelt before it, her voice a soft chant. But the words were wrong. They were backward. Elias froze. "Sister?" Her head tilted slowly toward him. Her eyes were open wide, unblinking. And then, without warning, she whispered. "He's standing behind you." Elias spun around. Nothing. Only the faint echo of breath in the empty pews. When he turned back, Sister Amara was gone. Her rosary lay in her place, burned through the middle, beads melted together like fused bone. The hum under the church grew louder, steady as a heartbeat. And in that sound, Father Elias heard a woman's voice again, soft as dust. "It wasn't me who sinned, it was you." Episode 4, The Blood Candle. That night, Father Elias could no longer bear the silence. The voice of Sister Amara lingered in his mind. "He's standing behind you." Every creak of the old rectory floor felt like a breath too close to his neck. He had not seen the nun again. Some said she wandered out into the fog and never returned. Others said she'd gone to finish her prayers underground. But Elias knew the truth. No one ever really left St. Daria. He lit a candle before his mother's grave, the same kind he'd used for every mass. The wax was pure white, blessed by the bishop himself. It should have burned clean. It should have symbolized purity. Instead, when he spoke the first line of prayer, the flame hissed like it was choking on air. Then it began to bleed. A single drop of crimson wax slid down the candle's side, glistening darkly in the moonlight. Another followed, and another, until the wax looked like it was weeping blood. The scent changed too, no longer the soft sweetness of beeswax, but something metallic, raw, like rust in old wounds. Elias leaned closer. The dripping formed patterns on the stone base, lines, curls, and crosses that looked deliberate. Latin letters began to emerge where the wax pooled. Sanguis vocabit lumen. The blood shall call the light. He whispered the translation under his breath. It was a phrase he had read only once, buried in the margins of a forbidden exorcism text. It referred to an ancient rite one used not to banish the dead, but to invite them back. The candle flickered violently, its flame growing taller, redder. The air around him pulsed with that same hum from the grave. The ground trembled faintly beneath his knees. He reached for his crucifix, but it was hot to the touch. When he dropped it, it landed in the blood wax with a hiss, searing the symbol of the cross into the stone. Then, a whisper. Not from the grave this time, but from the flame itself. "You lit what I left unfinished." Elias's breath caught. "Mother?" The candle flared. Shadows rushed across the gravestones, bending toward him like kneeling figures. The flame split into two, one steady, one shaking, as if breathing on its own. And then he saw it, a shape forming in the molten wax. A hand, pale and shaking, reaching upward from inside the candle itself. The fingers twisted toward him, grasping for something, maybe light, maybe him. He stumbled backward, knocking the candle over. It rolled into the grass, still burning, leaving behind a trail of smoldering blood. The wax spelled one final line before the fire died out. "Forgive what was buried beneath me." The hum beneath the soil grew louder. By dawn, Elias found the candle had burned itself down to the wick. But where it had stood, the grass had turned black in the perfect shape of a cross. And beneath that cross, the earth was breathing again. Episode 5, The Choir of the Dead. When the bells of St. Daria tolled that morning, their sound felt wrong. Too deep. Too slow. As if each note had been dragged up from under the ground. Father Elias stood before the altar, his voice trembling as he began the morning mass. The church was full for the first time in years. Men, women, children, faces pale under the glow of the stained glass, their eyes fixed on him like they were waiting for something more than prayer. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp stone and candle smoke. He opened the hymnal. "Let us sing the morning psalm," he said, forcing a smile. But the words that came from the congregation weren't the ones written on the page. The first voice rose, soft and low, an old woman's tone, weary but steady. Then another joined, and another. Within moments, the entire church was singing, but not any song Elias had ever heard. The melody was mournful, twisting, almost beautiful, yet every word was wrong. The lyrics spoke of a door that opens when the living forget, and of a light that burns beneath the grave. Elias's hands trembled. "Stop," he whispered, but no one did. Their eyes had turned upward, glassy and unblinking. The sound grew louder, filling every corner of the chapel until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. He backed away from the pulpit. The floor beneath the pews began to pulse, slow and rhythmic, the same heartbeat he'd heard from the grave. Then came the harmony. At first, it sounded like echoes. But Elias knew the acoustics of St. Daria. There were no echoes here. The voices were coming from below. Faint, distant, like hundreds of throats buried beneath the church, singing along. He dropped his Bible. The moment it hit the floor, every candle in the chapel flared bright red, their flames stretching high as though reaching for the ceiling. The song swelled to its peak, and then, in one perfect moment of silence, all the voices stopped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, one voice, clear, female, whispered from somewhere under the altar. "We remember now." The congregation blinked as if waking from a trance. Confused murmurs filled the pews. Some clutched their heads. Others wept. Elias stared at the altar, where a thin line of dust had begun to shift, moving in time with that invisible heartbeat. When he looked closer, he saw something written there, drawn in ashen blood. "The dawn is almost here." Elias fell to his knees. The ground was no longer solid beneath him. The stone trembled like skin. And beneath the chapel, faint but certain, the dead began to sing again, humming softly, as if waiting for the sun. Episode 6, The Boy Who Dug Too Deep. The morning after the strange hymn, the fog hung lower than usual, curling around the gravestones like smoke that refused to rise. Father Elias stood at the church door, watching as the villagers whispered among themselves. Something had happened during the night. He could feel it, that peculiar stillness that came only when fear walked before news. It was the baker's son. A boy named Matteo. He hadn't come home. They said he was last seen near the old cemetery just before dusk, dragging a small rusted shovel behind him. He'd told his friends he was going to dig where the ground sings. The other children had laughed. But by morning, the laughter had gone quiet. Elias went to the graveyard himself. The fog thickened as he walked, muffling even his own footsteps. When he reached his mother's grave, he froze. The soil had been disturbed, a long, uneven furrow carved beside the tomb, as if the earth had been clawed at by desperate hands. And at the end of that narrow trench, half buried in the mud, was the boy's shovel. Still warm. He touched it, and a sharp hum rippled through his arm, up into his chest. The ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. He knelt, brushing away the dirt. The hole Matteo had dug wasn't deep, barely enough for a child's arm, but it reached something. Stone. Smooth. Cold. It wasn't part of the grave. Elias wiped it clean. A small circular seal, carved with Latin inscriptions, stared back at him, Porta clausum ad lucem. The gate is closed to the light. He whispered the phrase aloud, and the hum beneath the ground changed pitch, no longer steady, but rising like a moan. The soil trembled. For a split second, Elias thought he heard someone moving below, fingers scraping stone. He staggered backward as the shovel beside him rattled violently and fell flat. Then came the smell. Not decay, but something sweet, cloying, almost floral. Like lilies left too long on a coffin. He turned toward the church. The fog had thickened so much he could barely see its spire. But through the mist came a faint sound, a child's voice, distant, fragile. "Father, it's open now." The voice faded into the wind. Elias ran toward the sound, shouting the boy's name, but the graveyard swallowed his words. When he returned to the trench, the seal was gone. Only soft earth remained untouched, as if it had never been disturbed. And the shovel? It had sunk halfway into the soil on its own. He didn't remember dropping to his knees, but when he looked up, the sun was gone. Dawn had passed without light. The grave stood darker than ever. And from deep below, the hum became a whisper once more, not one voice, but many. Dozens of them. Children. We dug too deep, Father. Elias fled the cemetery before the ground could finish breathing. Episode 7, The Portrait in Ash. The morning light that crept into St. Daria felt colder than it should have. Father Elias had not slept, his hands still trembled from what he'd seen at the graveyard. He tried to pray, but each word dissolved before leaving his lips. There was no comfort in scripture anymore. Only echoes. He walked through the rectory in silence. The walls smelled faintly of smoke, strange, since no candles had burned overnight. When he reached his office, he saw it for the first time. The painting. It hung just above the fireplace, a portrait of his mother, Marta Varela, painted decades ago by a local artist. She'd hated it. Said it made her eyes look too alive. The canvas had always been dusty, forgotten, another relic of the past. But now, her eyes were open. He froze, breath caught in his throat. He remembered it clearly, the last time he'd seen that painting, her eyes had been closed, hands folded over a rosary. Now, they stared straight ahead, glimmering faintly under a thin layer of soot. Elias stepped closer. The air near the canvas was warm. And the smell, stronger now. Burned wax. Ash. He touched the corner of the frame. His fingers came away black. Not paint, ash. He looked down, and saw a thin trail of gray dust on the floor, leading toward the hearth. Something in the fireplace hissed. Inside, the remains of a candle lay melted into a dark red puddle. Its wax had formed symbols as it cooled, jagged letters, almost like claw marks. He leaned closer, trying to read them. She sees through the dawn. The whisper came from behind him. He spun around. The room was empty, but the painting had changed again. Her head was slightly tilted now, her mouth parted, as though she were about to speak. He stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The portrait shuddered on the wall, not from the impact, but from something beneath the canvas. The surface rippled, like a sheet of skin stretched too tight. He reached for the crucifix around his neck, but it swung wildly, almost violently, against his chest. Mother? His voice cracked. The portrait moved. Just a flicker, the faintest motion of her lips. Then a single flake of ash drifted down from the painting, landing at his feet. He knelt to touch it, and the ash smeared across the floor in the shape of a smile. When he looked up again, the portrait had gone completely black. Only two eyes remained, glowing faintly from the darkness of the canvas. And beneath them, words appeared, written in the ash that now bled from the frame. The dawn is not the light, my son. It's the door. The hum from beneath the church walls began again, deeper this time, resonating through the floorboards, through the walls, through his bones. And for the first time since his return, Father Elias realized the grave was no longer just waking. It was watching. Episode 8, The Priest's Confession. For 3 nights, Father Elias hadn't dared to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the portrait, his mother's face staring through the dark, her painted eyes alive with something that wasn't memory. He had stopped ringing the bells for morning mass. The villagers whispered that St. Daria had gone silent again, that even God had turned away. But Elias wasn't praying anymore. He was remembering. He found the journal in the back of his old confessional booth, hidden behind warped panels of oak. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed by time and candle smoke. It was his handwriting, younger, hurried, trembling. The entries began with Latin prayers, then spiraled into fragments, sketches, and half-finished psalms. And then he saw the last entry. The one he'd written the night his mother died. The rite was not approved. They told me to stop. But she begged, not for life, but for release. I couldn't tell if it was her voice anymore. I said the final words. The lights died. The ground moved. I buried her before dawn. His throat tightened as he turned the page. A photograph was pressed between the sheets, the grave, freshly dug, with a cross burned into the soil. His handwriting beneath it read only, "Seal it before it breathes." He dropped the journal, his pulse hammering in his ears. A faint sound crackled behind him, the old cassette recorder on the table, its red light blinking. He hadn't turned it on. The speaker hissed softly, then played his own voice, younger, urgent. "Forgive her, Father. She did not ask to carry it." Then another voice answered. Low. Female. "You said you would keep it buried." Elias staggered backward, knocking the recorder to the floor. The tape continued to unwind, the voice now distorted, dragging like something crawling through mud. "You prayed for salvation, but you gave me resurrection." The hum started again, louder now, vibrating through the wooden floorboards. The crucifix on the wall tilted, fell, and split down the middle. Elias pressed his palms to his ears, but the sound was inside his skull. The whisper. The plea. The accusation. "You sinned for love, Elias." He stumbled toward the altar, gripping the edge for balance. "What do you want from me?" he gasped. The voice laughed, quiet, broken, almost tender. "The same thing you wanted, my son. To be forgiven." The lights flickered. The church doors groaned. Every candle in the chapel burst into flame, their light red as blood. And through that fiery glow, he saw the shadow of a woman forming against the far wall, her hands folded, her head bowed, as if praying. But when she lifted her face, there were no eyes. Only light. The hum ceased. Silence swallowed the air. And from the floor where the recorder had shattered, one last word echoed, distorted beyond human tone, but unmistakable. Dawn. Episode 9, The Cross That Wept. The dawn broke red that morning. Not the soft blush of sunrise, but a bleeding light that spilled through the stained glass like fire behind a wound. Father Elias woke to the sound of metal groaning, a slow, tortured bending that echoed through the empty nave of St. Daria. He thought it was the wind. Until he heard it drip. He rose from his bed and followed the sound into the chapel. The air was heavy with heat and incense, thick enough to sting his throat. Then he saw it, the great iron crucifix above the altar. It was weeping. From the eyes of Christ, dark streaks trickled downward, molten, glowing like tears forged from iron itself. They fell in slow, rhythmic drops, sizzling when they hit the stone floor. Each drop left behind a black scorch mark, and where several gathered, they began to form a shape, a circle enclosing a cross turned upside down. Elias stared, frozen. The air shimmered around the crucifix. Beneath it, the altar cloth smoked, curling inward like something breathing beneath it. He reached out a trembling hand, feeling the heat radiate from the metal. The closer he got, the more violent the air became, vibrating, humming, the same dreadful pulse that had haunted the graveyard. The first tear hit his wrist. It burned through his sleeve, searing flesh. He gasped and fell backward, clutching his arm. When he looked again, the melted iron drop on the floor had cooled, and in its reflection, he saw not his own face, but his mother's. Pale. Expressionless. Eyes open. Her lips moved soundlessly before forming a whisper that echoed inside him. "You cannot pray against what you created. He stumbled toward the pews, desperate for air. But the church was alive now, walls trembling, candles bending inward as though bowing to something unseen. The air smelled like metal and ash. From the shadows near the confessional, a faint voice began to hum. It was a hymn, slow, familiar, the same song the congregation had sung days before. But this time, it came from one voice. A woman's. "Mother," he breathed. The voice grew louder, wrapping around him, until he could feel the vibration in his ribs. The molten tears from the crucifix began to fall faster now, striking the altar in a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. One of the iron tears rolled across the floor and stopped at Elias's feet. He picked it up, even as it scorched his palm. Inside the drop, frozen in the cooling metal, was something small, a tooth. The voice whispered again, closer now. When the cross weeps, the dawn remembers. He turned toward the sound. The portrait of his mother, blackened from fire, hung on the far wall. But now her eyes were gone. The sockets were hollow, dripping faint trails of ash in perfect rhythm with the tears of the crucifix. And in that moment, Elias understood, the church itself was confessing. He fell to his knees, trembling. "What have I done?" he whispered. The ground beneath him cracked, just slightly, and from that thin fracture rose a breath of warm air, carrying with it a scent of lilies and blood. Then the whisper came once more, not from above, not from within, but from below. "You've woken the dawn." The cross groaned. The last tear fell. And the hum beneath St. Daria became a roar. Episode 10, The Visitor in White. The storm came without warning. Lightning split the sky above St. Daria, and the church bells, those rusted, dormant things, rang on their own, one by one, like a toll for the dead. Father Elias stood by the shattered altar, bandaging his burned hand, when he heard the knock. 3 slow taps against the great wooden doors. Not frantic. Not human. Deliberate. He hesitated before opening them. The storm's wind rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and soil freshly turned. A figure stood at the threshold, tall, shrouded in a cloak white as bone, its hood drawn low. Beneath the fabric, no face was visible. The voice that spoke was calm, almost melodic. Father Elias Varela. His name sounded like judgment. "Who are you?" he asked, gripping his crucifix. The stranger stepped inside, shutting the door with a single motion. The candles flickered, though no draft followed. "I am of the Order of the Eighth Seal," the figure said. "We are the ones who silence what the church refuses to see." Elias frowned. "That order was dissolved centuries ago." "Forbidden." "Forbidden," the voice replied, "but not forgotten. Just like your mother." The name froze the priest where he stood. "You knew her?" The stranger nodded once. "Marta Varela was not your mother when she died. She was the vessel chosen to bear the seal." The air seemed to thicken. "The seal?" Elias whispered. "The boundary between dawn and darkness," the stranger said. "Between the soul that prays for forgiveness and the one that answers it. When you performed the ritual 20 years ago, you tore that boundary apart." Elias's stomach turned. He remembered the candle, the blood, the whisper. The way the ground had moved beneath his hands. "I only wanted to free her," he said. "You did," the visitor murmured. "But not from sin. You freed what sin was holding back." Lightning flashed, flooding the chapel with white. For an instant, Elias saw the stranger's face beneath the hood, no eyes, no mouth, only pale skin marked by a single symbol carved into the forehead, infinity. When the light faded, the mark glowed faintly, bleeding gold. The figure turned toward the altar. "You must seal it again before the next dawn stands. If the hum becomes a voice, the grave will not stop breathing." It will speak. Elias stepped forward. How? The stranger drew something from beneath the cloak, a rosary made of blackened bone. With this, they said softly, placing it in his burned hand. But be warned, to seal the grave, the soul who opened it must be offered in return. Elias's breath caught. You mean? Yes, the visitor interrupted. You. Before he could answer, a gust of wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing every candle. When light returned, the visitor was gone. Only the bone rosary remained warm to the touch, as if pulsing faintly in rhythm with his own heartbeat. Then, from beneath the church floor, a whisper rose again, different now. Not pleading. Not afraid. He is lying. Elias clutched the rosary, staring at the cross that had melted above the altar. Somewhere in the darkness, he swore he saw movement, like someone kneeling where his mother's grave would be. And in the next flash of lightning, he realized the truth. The visitor in white had left footprints of ash that led straight to the graveyard. Episode 11, The Bells That Rang Themselves. The dawn after the storm came without light. The sky was gray, bruised, as if the night refused to leave. Father Elias stepped outside the rectory, the bone rosary clutched in his palm, its beads faintly pulsing with warmth, a heartbeat that wasn't his. The air was still. Not a single bird sang. Not a single leaf moved. Then, from somewhere deep within St. Daria, a sound began to rise, slow, deliberate, almost human. The bells. One toll. Then another. And another. Each ring came heavier than the last, shaking the air, echoing across the valley like thunder trapped inside the walls of the church. Elias froze, no one was in the bell tower. The ropes hung limp and motionless. Yet the sound was alive, climbing higher, louder, until every bell in St. Daria was singing at once. He ran toward the church doors, flinging them open. The interior glowed faintly red, as though lit from within. The crucifix above the altar was weeping again, thin trails of molten iron gliding down the Savior's face like tears of sorrow and rage. And between each toll of the bell, he heard it, a faint murmur, hidden beneath the metal's roar. A voice. Small. Fragile. A child's voice. Mother. Elias's stomach dropped. Mateo, he whispered, the missing boy. The bells rang again, faster now, almost frantic, as if trying to drown out the voice. But it persisted, echoing through the nave, weaving through the tolling. Mother, it's open now. He turned toward the sound. The floorboards beneath the front pews were trembling. Dust fell from the ceiling. The air felt electric, like the breath before lightning. Show yourself! Elias cried. And then the bells stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. A pressure filled the air, so thick it felt like drowning. Then, from under the floor, came the unmistakable sound of chains, dragging, scraping, tightening. Elias knelt, pressing his ear to the stone. The hum returned, low, steady, pulsing like blood. He could almost feel the heartbeat beneath him. Who's there? A whisper came, impossibly close. You sealed me once. He stumbled back. The stone beneath his feet was cracking, small fissures spreading like veins. He clutched the bone rosary, whispering fragments of Latin prayers, but the words felt hollow, eaten by the air. Then, in the stillness, the child's voice returned, softer now, filled with something like awe. She's coming. Elias froze. Who? But he already knew. The final bell rang, a single, low note that seemed to stretch forever. The sound poured through the church like liquid metal, vibrating through every beam, every cross, every soul. And as it faded, the portrait of his mother fell from the wall and shattered against the floor. Inside the cracked glass, her reflection moved. She was smiling. Behind her, faint but visible, a dozen pale hands pressed against the darkness as if trying to crawl their way into the light. The grave outside began to hum again. Not softly this time. Not hidden. It sang. And for the first time, Father Elias understood. The bells weren't calling the faithful to prayer. They were warning the living to run. Episode 12, The Mirror of Ashes. By the time night fell, Saint Daria was breathing again. The hum beneath the floorboards rose and fell like a sleeping lung, and the candle flames in the chapel bent toward the ground as though listening. Father Elias stood before the altar, drenched in sweat, the rosary of bone wrapped tight around his wrist like a shackle. He knew now there was no blessing left in this place, only memory and punishment. When he moved the broken pieces of his mother's portrait, he found a hatch beneath the floor. It had been sealed shut with iron nails, all burned black with age. On the center plank, carved into the wood, were the Latin words: Non vidias nisi typsum. You shall see nothing but yourself. The hammer trembled in his hand as he pried the nails loose. Each one came out with a hiss, as though pulled from flesh. The hatch opened to reveal a narrow staircase descending into dark. The air that rose from below was thick and cold, smelling of burnt wax and old water. He descended slowly, each step echoing like a confession. At the bottom lay a single stone chamber lit by one flickering candle, and in its center stood a mirror. It wasn't glass. It was ash. The surface shimmered gray and uneven, as though made from the soot of 1,000 burned prayers. The frame was carved from bone, twisted into a crown of hands reaching inward, their fingers frozen in silent pleading. Elias approached, and the candlelight bent oddly around it. He couldn't see his reflection, only shifting smoke. But when he whispered a prayer under his breath, something began to take shape. A face. His own. Then another, behind it. His mother. Her lips moved silently at first, forming the same words that had haunted him since the first night at the grave. It wasn't me who sinned. Elias stepped closer. Then who? The mirror rippled like disturbed water. The ash began to swirl violently, and in that storm of smoke he saw flashes, his younger self kneeling over her bed, the crucifix pressed to her chest, his voice crying over her screams. The mirror whispered now, the sound dry as bone. You spoke the words of resurrection, not of mercy. No, he backed away, trembling. I meant to save her. The reflection laughed, a brittle, awful sound that echoed off the stone walls. You cannot save what begged to die. Then the mirror cracked. Not outward, but inward, as if something behind it had struck the surface. A hand, gray, trembling, pushed against the glass, leaving streaks of soot. The candle extinguished itself. In the pitch dark, Elias could hear his own voice echoing, distorted, repeating the words from the old cassette. Forgive her, Father. She did not ask to carry it. The ash mirror pulsed with faint light, and in its dim reflection, he saw not one, but many faces pressing from the other side, his parishioners, the dead, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving in unison. The dawn remembers. He stumbled back toward the stairs, clutching the rosary. The hum beneath the church had become thunder now, shaking the stone, cracking the floor. And as he climbed into the light above, the mirror whispered one last thing, so soft it felt like breath on his neck. When you look upon the light, Elias, it will look back. Episode 13, The Flesh That Remembered. The next morning, the earth behind St. Daria cracked open like a wound. The storm from the night before had torn through the graveyard, toppling crosses and unearthing half-forgotten tombs. Father Elias wandered through the mist, the rosary of bone burning faintly in his palm. The hum that once pulsed beneath the soil was gone now. In its place was something worse, silence, thick and expectant, as if the ground itself was holding its breath. Near the back fence, one grave had collapsed entirely. The headstone was shattered, the name erased by time. But what caught Elias's eye wasn't the broken stone, it was the hand. A human hand, pale and bloated, reaching through the dirt like it was still searching for salvation. Elias froze. Then, with trembling fingers, he began to dig. The soil came away soft, warm, and wet, until the rest of the body emerged, a man in tattered priest robes. He brushed the dirt from its face. And then he stopped breathing. It was his face. The same scars. The same line along the jaw. Even the rosary still clutched in its dead fingers was identical to the one in his hand. Elias stumbled backward, shaking his head. No, this isn't real. But the corpse's chest moved. A shallow breath. Then another. The thing that looked like him exhaled softly, the sound dry and ragged, like a whisper crawling through dust. Its lips parted. Elias. He fell to his knees. What are you? The corpse's eyes snapped open, white, veined, empty. And yet, in that blindness, Elias felt himself being seen. It spoke again, voice trembling, fractured. You buried me, when you spoke her name. Elias staggered back, horror gripping his spine. You're not me. You wished to cleanse the sin, it murmured, so you tore it from yourself. The right demanded balance. Flesh for flesh. He looked at its hands, nails cracked, skin split, but still twitching. The veins along its arms pulsed faintly, carrying no blood but something darker, like the echo of memory. Elias raised the rosary, pressing it to his chest. God forgive me. The corpse laughed, a sound that wasn't human. He did. Then, before his eyes, the body began to pray. The same prayer Elias had whispered during his last exorcism. The same one that ended his mother's life. Eternal rest grant unto her, O Lord. Elias's hands shook. He clutched his rosary tighter, but the beads burned hot, searing his skin. Stop, he cried. The corpse smiled. We are one prayer, you and I. Two mouths speaking the same sin. Its flesh began to peel, flaking into dust and ash, but the lips kept moving. Even as it decayed, it kept praying faster, louder, until the sound filled the graveyard like 1,000 voices rising from the soil. Elias fell to the ground, clutching his ears, screaming. Then everything stopped. When he looked again, the grave was empty. The soil was untouched, smooth as if nothing had ever been buried there. Only one thing remained. A fragment of skin, pale and dry, clinging to the cross at the grave's edge, carved with a single line in blood. The dawn remembers its own. And in that moment, Elias felt the hum return beneath his feet, stronger than ever. This time, it wasn't calling from below. It was answering from within him. Episode 14, The Light That Lied. The dawn came too early. Father Elias knew it before he opened his eyes, the light was wrong. It poured through the window in a shade that didn't belong to the sun, red, thick, and pulsing, like it had veins. He stumbled out of bed and drew the curtains. Outside, St. Daria glowed in the false warmth of a crimson sunrise. The villagers were already on their knees in the square, heads bowed, faces turned toward the horizon. But the light came not from the horizon, it came from above. A single blinding orb hung over the church, not the sun, not the moon, but something in between. Too close. Too alive. It hummed softly, the same dreadful rhythm that had haunted him for weeks, and with each pulse, Elias's rosary burned against his skin. He stepped outside, shielding his eyes. The villagers were whispering prayers in perfect unison, yet their words were wrong, twisted versions of Latin that melted into one another. Lucem, lucem, dona nobis lucem. Give us light. Elias shouted, "Stop! This is not the light of God." But they didn't move. Some were smiling through tears, hands raised toward the red sky. Their shadows, however, their shadows moved the other way. They bent against the light, crawling up walls, stretching long and thin, reaching back toward the graveyard. The bells began to toll again, though no one pulled the ropes. Each toll sounded like the cracking of bones. Then, in the midst of the false sunlight, something shifted. A figure stepped out from the haze, robed in white. The visitor. "Father," it said softly. "You see now what dawn truly is." Elias's voice broke. "This is no dawn. This is deception." The visitor tilted its head. "Deception is the oldest form of faith. You asked for light. You never asked whose." Elias backed away, clutching his rosary. The beads pulsed harder, faster, each throb syncing with the hum that filled the air. "You said the grave must be sealed," Elias hissed. "Yet everything you've told me only opened it wider." The figure smiled beneath its hood. "The grave was never meant to close. It is not a prison, Father. It is a womb." Elias's heart stopped for a moment. A womb for what? The light above them flared brighter, flooding the town in white-red brilliance. The villagers began to scream, not in pain, but in worship. Their voices merged into one, a perfect choir of agony and devotion. The visitor raised a pale hand. "For what your mother carried." From behind the church came a sound, stone splitting, earth tearing apart. The grave. Elias turned to run, but the ground beneath him rippled like liquid fire. Every shadow in the square twisted upward, forming human shapes that moved though they had no bodies. They reached for him, whispering in his mother's voice. "You lit the candle, my son. Now see what it burns for." The false sun pulsed one last time, then flickered out. Darkness fell. But it wasn't the comforting dark of night. It was the inside of something vast, breathing, and alive. And in that infinite black, the hum became words. Dawn was never the light. It was the opening. When the true sun rose hours later, St. Daria was empty. Every door stood open. Every candle melted to blood. And on the altar, scrawled in ash and wax, was a message written by a hand that trembled. The light lied. Episode 15, The Unholy Mass. The morning after the false dawn, St. Daria was silent. No birds, no wind, no life. Only the echo of the bells that had rung themselves into madness. The villagers, pale and trembling, gathered outside the church. Their eyes were hollow, as if something inside them had already knelt before an unseen altar. Father Elias stood at the doors, the rosary of bone digging into his palm. His burned hand throbbed with every heartbeat. The earth beneath the church still hummed softly, faint, patient, like a creature breathing in its sleep. He told himself this would be the last Mass. One final prayer to drive out the darkness or die trying. The church filled quickly. Dozens of villagers packed into the pews, their faces turned toward him with a strange, fearful reverence. Even the air felt thick, like syrup, clinging to his robes as he moved toward the altar. He lit the candles. Their flames burned red. "Let us pray," he began. The congregation rose to their feet, heads bowed. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, like a ripple through still water, the voices began. Half of them prayed forward, the sacred words of the liturgy. The other half prayed backward, their syllables bending and breaking, forming sounds no human mouth was meant to make. Elias froze. "Stop." But the voices grew louder, twisting together into a single sound, a chant, rising and falling like the tide. The red candlelight flickered violently, casting shadows that crawled along the walls. The floorboards trembled. The hum beneath the church grew stronger. Louder. The very stone began to pulse, in rhythm with the congregation's breath. Elias shouted over them, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy." But his words were drowned out. From the altar, a low groan escaped the earth, deep, guttural, almost human. Cracks spread across the marble floor, glowing faintly from within. The ground swelled upward, like something beneath was pushing to escape. Elias clutched the crucifix to his chest. "Lord, deliver us." Then the walls began to sing. Yes, sing. The sound came from the stones themselves, the voice of the church turned inside out. The hymn they chanted was older than Latin, older than Scripture, and as it filled the room, the villagers began to sway. Their eyes rolled white. Their mouths still prayed, but now blood trickled from their lips, forming trails down their necks. The candles melted faster, pooling into a single red river that ran down the altar steps. Elias stepped back, horrified, as the crucifix above him began to twist, the metal reshaping itself into a spiral, pointing downward. A voice rose from the cracks in the floor, clear and familiar. His mother's. "You prayed for salvation, Elias. But every prayer is a door." The earth split. A violent breath burst from beneath the church, sending shards of stone flying. The congregation collapsed, some screaming, some laughing. Elias shielded his face as heat poured from below, the scent of lilies in decay filling the air. In that moment, every candle went out. The room plunged into darkness. Then a light emerged from beneath the altar, not holy, not divine, but alive. It pulsed like the beating of a heart. Elias fell to his knees, tears streaking his face. "Mother," he whispered. "What have I done?" The voice that answered wasn't hers anymore. "You've brought me to Mass, my son." And as the first rays of the true dawn touched the windows, St. Daria breathed once more, deep, long, and full of something ancient waking in the soil. Episode 16, The Door of Bone. When the last candle of the unholy Mass died, the church fell into a darkness that felt alive. It wasn't the absence of light, it was the presence of something else. Something that watched. Father Elias stood alone in the ruins of St. Daria. The villagers had fled during the night, only their footprints remained, pressed into the mud like fading prayers. The hum beneath the floor was no longer a sound but a pulse, steady and relentless, calling to him like blood to its heart. He followed it. Behind the altar, beneath the cracked marble slab, he found what the visitor in white had promised, a narrow passageway hidden under centuries of ash. The air that drifted out was cold, damp, and strangely sweet, carrying the faint scent of lilies in decay. He lit a torch and descended. The walls were carved with prayers written backward, curling symbols that shimmered faintly when the flame passed over them. The deeper he went, the more the air seemed to bend around him, pressing against his chest, whispering in the voice of his mother. "You were never meant to seal me, Elias, only to join me." The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The floor was stone, slick with moisture, and the ceiling disappeared into shadow. In the center stood a door, towering, circular, impossibly intricate. It was made of bone. Thousands of bones, woven together like vines, fused by something darker than time. Femurs, ribs, skulls, every inch of it inscribed with Latin prayers that glowed faintly as if remembering the mouths that once spoke them. Elias fell to his knees. Dear God! But God had stopped listening long ago. He approached the door slowly, the rosary of bone in his hand trembling with each step. As he drew closer, the hum became deafening. He could feel it in his teeth, in his blood, in the trembling of his soul. In the center of the door, a shape was carved, a woman's face, serene, sorrowful. His mother's. Her mouth was open, and inside it was a keyhole. He hesitated. Then the rosary began to move. The beads twisted in his hand, writhing like living veins. Before he could stop it, they snapped free, floating toward the door. Each bead fit perfectly into the keyhole, one after another, until only the crucifix remained in his palm. It burned cold, the metal biting into his skin. "Mother," he whispered. "If this is what you wanted, show me." The door shuddered. A deep breath escaped from within, the sound like wind howling through a cathedral made of ribs. The bones shifted, grinding against one another, forming words in the dead tongue of the church. "The dawn stands waiting." Elias pressed the crucifix into the lock. The moment he did, the floor beneath him gave way. The chamber trembled. The bones creaked and screamed. And from behind the door came a sound so vast, so ancient, it couldn't have been human, something between a sob and a birth cry. The light that spilled through the cracks wasn't holy. It was pale and trembling, the color of dying stars. He tried to step back, but the door's shadow reached for him, clutching his wrists, pulling him closer. From inside came a whisper, his own voice, older, broken. "You cannot unmake the dawn, Elias. You are the door." The crucifix melted in his hand. The bones parted. And for the first time, Father Elias looked upon what had been calling to him all along, something luminous and rotting, beautiful and unbearable. He screamed. The door closed behind him. And Saint Daria exhaled. Episode 17, The Woman Who Waited. When Father Elias opened his eyes, there was no sound, no breath, no hum, no wind. Only light. A pale, endless glow that seemed to stretch in all directions, neither warm nor cold. It was not heaven, nor was it hell. It was something in between, a waiting place. He was lying on smooth stone, his robes torn and stained with soot. The door of bone was gone. Behind him, only a shadow remained, the outline of where it had stood, pulsing faintly like an afterimage burned into the world. Then he heard her voice. Soft. Calm. The voice that had blessed his childhood prayers and cursed his manhood. Elias. He turned. She sat at the edge of the light, her hands folded in her lap, her hair silver and untouched by time. Her skin was almost translucent, her eyes glowing faintly, not white, not gold, but a color that had no name. Mother. She smiled. I waited. Elias stumbled toward her, falling to his knees. Where am I? In the place between the last prayer and the first dawn, she said gently. Where the faithful wait when faith has nowhere left to go. He shook his head. I tried to save you. I tried to bring you peace. Her smile trembled. You brought me return. He could see it now, the faint scars around her wrists, the mark of where the ropes had bound her during the failed exorcism years ago. He had thought those wounds belonged to her body. He was wrong. They belonged to her soul. You opened the door, she continued, rising slowly. You thought it would lead to God. But the dawn you called was not his. Elias's voice cracked. Then what is it? She stepped closer, and the light bent around her, dimming. The dawn is not a beginning, my son. It's a trade. A moment when what is worshipped takes the place of the worshipper. When the living offer their faith and are swallowed by it. He stared at her, trembling. Then what are you? I am what faith left behind, she said. The last thing it remembered before it turned into hunger. The ground beneath them rippled, the light growing darker at the edges. Shapes moved in the distance, shadows with hands that reached and faces that wept without sound. They're coming, she whispered. They smell the open door. Then close it. Elias cried. Seal it again." She shook her head. "It's too late. The seal was your body, Elias. Your faith was the lock. When you came here, you brought the key." He felt it then, his chest aching, the rosary of bone now fused into his skin, glowing faintly under the flesh. The hum began again, inside him this time, steady as a heartbeat. "You said you waited," he whispered. "For what?" She smiled, and tears of light welled in her eyes. "For you to understand." She touched his face, her fingers cool and soft. The moment her hand met his skin, the hum stopped. Everything, the light, the air, even thought, froze. Then she leaned close, her lips near his ear, and whispered, "The dawn is not coming, Elias. It's already here." The world shattered. Light imploded into darkness. And when the glow returned, she was gone. Only the echo of her words remained, circling the endless white. The dawn remembers its own. Elias stood alone now, a shadow cast in a world made of light, realizing too late that the woman who waited had not been waiting to be found, she had been waiting to be freed. And in freeing her, he had given the dawn its shape. Episode 18, The Grave That Stood at Dawn. When Father Elias awoke, he was lying in the graveyard. Dawn had returned, soft, silent, merciless. The fog rolled low across the earth, wrapping the tombstones like shrouds. Above him, the sun hung pale and red, neither rising nor setting. It simply watched. He pushed himself up, coughing dirt from his lungs. His robes were torn, his hands blackened. The rosary of bone was gone. Only a ring of scorched flesh around his wrist remained, the memory of faith turned into fire. The church bell hung motionless, but the air still rang. A soundless toll. A heartbeat echoing through the soil. Saint Daria was dead. Its windows shattered, its altar split, its crucifix melted into a single twisted form, the shape of a man and a woman intertwined. And before the ruins, two graves stood side by side. The first, he knew well. Marta Varela, 1931 to 2005. The second was freshly dug. Its headstone bore his own name. Father Elias Varela, 1974? He stared at it for a long time, unable to breathe. The question mark seemed to bleed in the dawnlight, as if the stone itself hadn't decided whether he belonged to the living or the dead. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Soft, deliberate, like a heartbeat given shape. He turned. The visitor in white stood at the edge of the graveyard. The cloak was stained now, gray and red, as though it had been walking through centuries of dust. The voice that came from beneath the hood was calm, almost kind. "You did it," it said. "You opened the door completely." Elias's voice trembled. "Where is she?" The figure tilted its head. "Gone. As all light must be when it fulfills its purpose." He looked up at the sky. The red sun had dimmed, but it didn't move. The air was heavy with stillness, as though time itself refused to pass. "What happens now?" Elias whispered. The visitor's answer was simple. "Now the dawn stands." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "The world no longer turns toward morning or night. It waits. You have brought the moment of stillness, the hour before God remembers or forgets." Elias shook his head. "I only wanted forgiveness." The hood lifted slightly. Beneath it, no face, only blinding light and faint echoes of countless voices whispering in unison. "You were forgiven, Father. That was the price." Elias stepped backward, staring at his grave. The soil trembled, the cross above it tilting as if ready to fall. From deep below came a single, steady hum, slow and peaceful now, like breathing after pain. He looked once more at his mother's tomb. The stone was cracked open. From within, faint light glowed, soft and pulsing, the color of morning through fog. He knelt between the two graves, the earth warm beneath his palms. "If this is what dawn is," he whispered, "then let it stand." The visitor in white raised a hand, and the world dimmed. "So it shall." The red light faded into gray. The bells of St. Daria tolled one final time. And as the sound drifted across the valley, the graves began to close, one of flesh, one of faith. When silence returned, only the wind remained, moving gently through the cemetery. Two headstones stood together beneath the pale sky, mother and son, sinner and priest, bound by the same dawn that refused to die. And as the first light of true morning touched the horizon, the hum beneath the earth sighed once more, soft and eternal. The graves stood still. The dawn, at last, had found its place.
Epilogue: The dawn that waited. Years later, the town of St. Daria was forgotten. The roads that once led to it had collapsed beneath weeds and roots. The church stood in silence, its windows shattered, its bell tower broken, its altar blackened by time. Only the graveyard remained intact, two headstones standing side by side, untouched by moss or rain. On a gray morning, a car stopped at the edge of the ruins. A young priest stepped out, clutching a journal bound in cracked leather. The front read, faintly, "Father Elias Varela." He walked through the fog toward the church. Every step echoed like it was falling into something hollow beneath the ground. Inside, dust floated in the stale air, dancing in the fractured light. He found the altar still split, a narrow seam running down the middle as if the earth itself had exhaled. And beneath the stone, faint, steady, came a sound. Thump. Thump. Like a heartbeat. The priest froze, lowering his candle toward the floor. The flame flickered, bending sideways. Then he noticed the symbol scratched into the base of the altar, a circle enclosing a cross, etched by burned fingers long ago. He traced it absent-mindedly. The stone was warm. The journal fell open in his hand, its final page marked by a line written in shaking script. "If you find this, do not pray for dawn." The ground beneath him pulsed once, twice. Then came a breath, soft, almost gentle, rising from below the chapel floor. The priest looked toward the graves outside. The fog was moving, slowly curling upward like smoke. And from somewhere deep within the earth, a woman's voice whispered, faint, loving, and endless. I waited. The candle went out. Fade to black. The grave that stood at dawn. Every prayer is a door, and one day, something will answer.